Today on the podcast, listen, regulation. Nobody loves talking about regulation, but this is getting interesting. When you have a fake Joe Biden calling like a million people in New Hampshire, that is news that hits the top of your news feed. So we're not just talking about regulation. We are talking about what's behind all this. And listen, the FCC was furious about this, and they all of a sudden are starting to drop very, very quick laws around AI powered robocalls, and all of a sudden what's happening with some of these new startups that are doing this. The EU is coming out with things. Jaden, this is like, it feels like the last week has blown up around this. What do you got for us on this?
Yeah, okay. So there's a lot going on. If you go and look at the news headlines, you're going to see things like FCC officially declares AI voice robocalls illegal. And then in addition, you're going to see EU's draft election security guidelines for tech giants take aim at political deepfakes. Okay, so all this to say, the government is working on this stuff. One thing I want to say and explain is what is going on with the AI voiced robocalls. So there was a group that was sending out these like AI generated Biden calls telling people not to vote in the New Hampshire primary. Very interesting. There's people trying to get to the bottom of who sent them out, whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just you and I predicted this, honestly, in our election episode a while back. So this isn't surprising. We literally said this was going to happen. So what's happening about that? The FCC has essentially ruled or has said that these are illegal. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, awesome, I'm not going to get any more AI voice robocalls. Actually, you probably still will, because what they've said is actually nothing new. Pretty much what they're saying is that AI generated voices are artificial, and therefore they're against the law when used in automated calling scams. But automated calling scams were already illegal. So they're just saying it pretty much, it's like them saying it is illegal to rob the bank with a machete. It's like, yeah, it's illegal to rob the bank, but doing it with a machete is also illegal. So it's the exact same thing. I think a lot of people are, I don't know, getting like, oh, this is awesome. It's nothing too exciting. Now, I think this is interesting because I was thinking about the implications of this with like sales calls and stuff like that, which I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Like call centers are going to be run by AI, and AI voices are going to talk to you. They might even cold call you. And of course, I understand that this is very annoying. I hate getting those calls. So I understand where that's coming from. But at the same time, part of me is like, well, this is interesting technology, and maybe there's some like useful ways that this could be used in like a good way that's good for businesses, and maybe consumers get some sort of benefit out of it. I'm sure there's like cases you can make on both sides of that. And I was like, oh man, this law completely shuts it down. When I looked into it, no, it doesn't shut it down. It just says you can't use these for illegal things. So I think it's pretty much a big, it's kind of a big nothing burger, this law here. But a lot of people are talking about it, so I wanted to clarify on what exactly is going on there.
Well, Jaden, the other thing is that I find with this that's so interesting is that, one of these demos that blew up a few weeks ago or whatever, I know I put it on LinkedIn, was this Bland AI demo, right? And this was the things where it said we can send out 500,000 calls at a time or something like that, right? And it was all using this very, natural language, all that kind of stuff. And it had a really cool demo where you could actually call and test it out to see it. And it had sort of a normal version, it had a turbo version, which was more sort of like a quicker version. So I tested it, and Jaden, oh my gosh, like the tech behind this is insane what Bland is doing, right? Because the latency is like, it said, oh, we're the quickest latency around. I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. But it really, really was. It sounded like a fast conversation like you and I are having, not sort of that pause and everything like that. So a couple of funny things about that. First of all, when I tested it, I immediately got it to go off the rails because I'm like, wait, are you just like an LLM? It's like, yeah. I'm like, so we could talk about anything. It's like, sure. I'm like, tell me about like, how long oak trees tend to, like, whatever. It's like, sure. And so that was like amazing. But the other, kind of like interesting thing about this, Jaden, and this sort of goes to, AI applied, right? Like how we talk about this stuff all the time. Sometimes it's not the product. Sometimes it is the underlying technology. So this is interesting. I totally agree. Robocalls were already illegal. This is just a way of highlighting so people don't freak out when you hear 500,000 calls, every day or whatever. So it's sort of, it's in the same way, like if people were freaked out about the machete, like something horrible happened, in your example. But just with this, for example, Bland, in order to get this going, created a super, super, low latency, super fast AI talking model, right? It reminds me of like the Rabbit R1 with this large action model. My own personal feeling is that the Rabbit R1 is not going to do anything. Now, maybe let's cut and paste that and sort of play that over and over again when the R1 replaces the iPhone and I sound like an idiot. But I think this large language model, the large action model underneath is interesting. In the same way, MasterCard, I don't know if you saw this, where they said, hey, we're going to cut down on, or we're going to increase our fraud detection or whatever by 300%. And then if you look into the tech that they're doing, it's very like Minority Report. It's like we are using customer history to to sort of like predict what store they're going into next. So all these things, the product is kind of the headline, but I love looking at the tech underneath this. So I'm just thinking like, when we think about these AI robocalls and everything, there is a tech here that will be really used, and it will be used hopefully in a way that's not going to annoy the holy heck out of like everybody on the planet,
100%. So I think it's an interesting space, and I think it's definitely evolving. I don't think we've heard the end of rules and regulations in regard to these like AI voices and robocalling. It's interesting that we're talking about it. Of course, this one doesn't really make much of a material difference in any way, but I think it's probably setting precedent that they're like weighing in on this stuff, and they'll probably start doing that in the future. So I would just say like look out for that. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to talk about today is the EU's draft election security guidelines for tech companies, and specifically in regards to deepfakes. Now, this is a draft, so they're essentially working on the bill. It's in progress right now, so this isn't something that they've like proposed and it's getting voted on at the moment, but it's in the process of happening. And I think it's interesting because it's targeting pretty much all of the top companies: Facebook, Google, TikTok, X, and talking about AI generated deepfakes on their platforms, what the risks are. And they're specifically saying the risks are because of like for political deepfake stuff is really where they're kind of focusing on. One thing I do think is interesting with this is that they're like trying to slide this in or add this into their Digital Services Act, which is kind of their like rebooted e-commerce rules. So it's kind of interesting. That's like the place they think that this fits. But in any case, I wanted to read a quote from them in regards to this on kind of what they're doing and what they're seeing here. So they said, recent technological developments in generative AI have enabled the creation and widespread use of artificial intelligence capable of generating text, image, videos, or other synthetic content. While such developments may bring new opportunities, that may lead to specific risks in the context of elections, right? So they're highlighting specifically elections. They then say generative AI can notably be used to mislead voters or to manipulate electoral processes by creating and disseminating inauthentic, misleading, synthetic content regarding political actors, false depictions of events, election polls, context, or narratives. Okay, whatever. They go on. They also mention hallucinations, and it can misrepresent reality. So, okay, all of that to say, what I want to say in regards to all of this is, while some people are like, oh my gosh, generative AI, and I do get like you make a deep fake, like Donald Trump throwing a rock at somebody or Biden smashing someone's car, and then it's like, you try to make it go viral. Like, okay, we understand that, but I think a lot of people are kind of getting savvy to this, and it's not gonna. So anyways, whatever. But what I will say is this is nothing new, right? It's not like generative AI is the reason that this is possible. You could go Photoshop Biden smashing a car, or Donald Trump throwing a rock, or the Chancellor of Germany doing something crazy. Like, you could Photoshop this stuff. And also, the last election cycle, we heard plenty of talk about fake news and misinformation and all this kind of stuff. So like, I don't think all of the blame for this is on AI tools. Like, at the end of the day, if people are doing things they shouldn't, it's the people doing those things. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if anyways, I'm always like, less regulation is better. That's me personally, but I do see this as an area where people have a lot of concerns. So
and Jane, I think you nailed it, which is my original concern when I get at, so I go and talk to companies, I consult with companies a lot and sort of like train on this stuff. And, when we talk about sort of like safety and security and ethics and all that kind of stuff, what I usually say is like, my big concern is around deep fakes. But now entering election season, I think you're right. I mean, people are so prone to believe anything that my concern around deepfakes and things like that tends to be much more like, the Taylor Swift stuff that kind of like popped all over X, and things that like are really deeply harmful for people, especially in that realm, especially around pornography and things like that. That's terrifying
Hmm.
to me. Sort of, when you have, for especially like sort of, on revenge and all that kind of stuff, let alone
Yeah.
celebrities and everything else. That's terrifying. In terms of the political side of it, yeah, it's horrible, but you're so right on this. And TechCrunch on this actually has a great hold on. TechCrunch has a great quote where they say they sort of like list out all the stuff that's happening with the EU regulations, and then they say, of course it doesn't. This is a quote. Of course, it doesn't take a staggering amount of compute power and cutting edge AI systems to mislead voters. Some politicians are expert in producing fake news just using their own vocal cords. And isn't that the truth, right? I mean, I think that people are going to believe something or not. You're right. Photoshop has already been in existence, everything like that. I will be interested to sort of see how EU actually enforces this. I think the interesting story behind the story here is, how do you start enforcing this stuff? There's going to be a lot of
Right.
AI regulation and everything else. We were talking about robocalls before. How is this stuff get enforced? And so, of course, deepfakes should be fake. Of course, robocalls with using AI should be, all this stuff, of course, should be illegal. What is the government doing? And this is not me. This is not a call to action. I'm just genuinely curious. How do they figure out how to regulate? And I think this may be as much of a regulation implementation, does this thing have teeth story, as much as it is let's ban deepfake story.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's interesting because there's different aspects of this. I think different people have different concerns on a lot of levels. I think everyone can agree that, making deep fakes of people without their consent, doing things they don't consent to, that's horrible. And it shouldn't be allowed. It's tricky because it's like, how do you regulate that when there's going to be open source models? I don't like that future. I just don't know how it's even possible to stop it all, which is sad, unfortunately. And then the only area that I think it draws me or gives me concern is like, how do we regulate it, right? Like, if we look at what happened, when Elon bought Twitter and then he released, the Twitter files, which showed that essentially the CIA had access to, send Twitter a list of accounts or posts they didn't like to go get deleted. And it's like, is that essentially how we have to regulate it again? Like, we just, the intelligence agencies or whatever the regulatory body is just going to like have people patrolling the internet and like sending in lists of things to get deleted? And then does that feel like censorship? I know that this is going to be the debate that's happening. Whatever side of the argument you fall on, this is the debate that will be happening. So I think that's going to be a lot of people's concerns. And so it's true. It's like so tricky because on the one hand, we have something that's like deeply harmful with these deep fakes, but on the other hand, it's like the regulation could have its own issues as well. So that's going to be something crazy that we all have to grapple with and essentially figure out the solutions to how to mitigate the risks and do it in a fair way. So it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And this is where, hopefully we're sort of addressing this stuff on, AI applied. Like, what does it actually mean for your life? I will say I've just launched this new AI mindset newsletter, which tries to get into these things. Like, how do we actually think about this? Not just what's in the news, but like, how does this actually apply to you? So subscribe. You'll get, I promise, the single greatest generative AI quick start guide you've ever seen in your life. Help, in collaboration with the great Robert Haslam. And also, listen, just like keep staying tuned, because Jaden and I are going to stay on top of this, because we are going to be entering election season sooner than you think. I'm going to be very curious to sort of see what actually pops up on our news feed, and we'll break it down.
100%. Thanks so much for tuning in and have a fantastic rest of your day.